The ice had claimed her body but not her spirit, and Josephine Sinclair lay frozen to the creek bed. Her dark hair spread like a raven's wings across the white expanse. When the stranger's boots crunched through the snow toward her that bitter January morning in 1878, Zachary Nash had been tracking a rogue stallion through the Montana Territory for 3 days when he spotted the dark shape against the frozen creek. At first, he thought it was a dead animal, something taken down by wolves perhaps, but as he drew closer, his heart seized in his chest. A woman. She was lying face down on the ice, her traveling cloak frozen to the surface, her hands splayed out as though she had tried to claw her way forward before exhaustion took her. He jumped from his horse, sending the animal skittering back with his sudden movement, and ran the last few yards. Dropping to his knees beside her, he touched her shoulder and felt how rigid the fabric had become, fused to the ice beneath her. Her skin was pale as milk where it showed at her wrists and neck, but when he pressed his fingers to the side of her throat, he felt it. A pulse. Faint as a whisper, but there. "Madam," he said, his voice rough from days of silence. "Madam, can you hear me?" There was no response. Her eyes were closed, her lips tinged blue. She was dying, would be dead within the hour if he did not act quickly. He tried to lift her, but her cloak held fast to the frozen creek. The ice had her, would not release her without a fight. Zachary pulled his hunting knife from his belt and began sawing through the heavy wool of her cloak. The fabric was thick, made for harsh winters, and it took precious minutes to cut through. His hands worked with desperate efficiency, carving away the material that bound her to the frozen ground. Finally, the last threads gave way, and he was able to slip his arms beneath her and lift. She weighed almost nothing, or perhaps it was the fear coursing through him that made her seem light as air. He held her against his chest, feeling how cold she was even through his own thick coat. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he could see ice crystals clinging to her eyelashes. "You are not dying today," he said, speaking to her as though she could hear him, as though his words alone could anchor her to this world. "You were made to rise." He carried her to his horse, which stamped nervously at the scent of near death. Zachary had to speak softly to calm the animal before he could mount with the woman in his arms. He settled her across his lap, wrapping his own coat around her, and turned the horse back the way he had come. There was a line shack about an hour's ride from here, a small shelter the ranchers used during the summer cattle drives. It would have to do. He could not make it to Walla Walla, Washington Territory, not with her in this condition. The town was another day's hard ride, and she did not have that kind of time. The ride to the shack felt endless. Zachary kept one arm locked around the woman, holding her tight against him, trying to share what warmth his body could offer. He talked to her the entire way, his voice low and steady, telling her about the landscape they passed, about the stallion he had been tracking, about anything at all just to fill the terrible silence. "My name is Zachary Nash," he said as the horse picked its way through a stand of pines. "I work for the Double R Ranch, been there 5 years now. Good work, honest pay, though the winters are hell. Begging your pardon for the language, I grew up in Texas, came north after the war. Figured I had seen enough death for one lifetime, wanted to start fresh somewhere new. Funny how life works, finding you like this. Makes a man think about fate and purpose and all those things preachers go on about." Her head had fallen forward against his chest, and he could feel each shallow breath she took, could feel how her body shivered even in her unconscious state. That was good. Shivering meant her body was still fighting, still trying to warm itself. It was when the shivering stopped that a person truly began to freeze. The lined shack appeared through the trees like a miracle. It was small, barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it had a stone fireplace and a door that latched. Zachary dismounted carefully, keeping the woman secure in his arms, and kicked the door open. Inside, the shack was dusty and smelled of old smoke, but it was shelter. He laid her on the single narrow cot in the corner and immediately set about building a fire. There was wood stacked beside the fireplace, seasoned and dry, and he thanked whatever cowboy had last used this place for leaving it well stocked. Within minutes, he had flames crackling in the hearth, and he turned his attention back to the woman. Her wet clothing would kill her as surely as the cold. He hesitated only a moment before beginning to remove her frozen garments. He worked quickly, keeping his eyes averted as much as possible, focused only on the task at hand. Her dress was soaked through, her petticoats stiff with ice. He stripped them away, wrapping her instead in his bedroll and the dry blankets he found in a chest by the wall. Once she was as dry and warm as he could make her, he sat back and really looked at her for the first time. She was young, probably no more than 22 or 23, with delicate features and skin that would be lovely when it was not gray with cold. Her hair, now drying in the heat of the fire, was a rich brown with hints of red where the light caught it. Who was she? What had she been doing out on that frozen creek? There were no homesteads nearby, no reason for a woman to be traveling alone in this weather. Questions crowded his mind, but they would have to wait. Right now, all that mattered was keeping her alive. Zachary heated water in a pot over the fire and tried to get her to drink. Most of it dribbled down her chin, but some made it past her lips. He wiped her face gently and checked her hands and feet for frostbite. Her fingers were pale but not blackened, and when he rubbed them, trying to restore circulation, he saw her eyelids flutter. "That is right," he said softly. "Come on back now. You are safe." Her eyes opened slowly, and for a moment she stared at him without comprehension. They were green, the color of new leaves in spring, and filled with confusion and fear. "Easy," Zachary said, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "You are safe. I found you on the frozen creek. You were in a bad way, but you are warming up now." She tried to speak, but her voice came out as a croak. He held the cup of water to her lips again, and this time she drank, though her hands shook so badly he had to help her. "Where am I?" she finally managed. "Line's shack about an hour north of the frozen creek where I found you. We are in Montana territory, about a day's ride from Walla Walla if you are headed that direction." Her eyes widened. "How long have I been here?" "A few hours. It is late afternoon now. I found you this morning." She closed her eyes and he saw tears leak from the corners. "I thought I was going to die out there." "What happened? How did you end up on that creek?" Josephine Sinclair was silent for a long moment, and Zachary wondered if she would answer at all. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "My father died 6 months ago. He was a trapper, worked these mountains his whole life. After he passed, I had nothing, no family, no money. A woman in Bannack told me there was work in Walla Walla, jobs for women in the new territories. I sold everything I had for a horse and supplies and set out 2 weeks ago." She paused, swallowing hard. "3 days ago, my horse spooked during a storm, threw me and ran off. I tried to follow it, but I got turned around. I have been walking ever since, trying to find my way. Last night I thought I saw lights in the distance, thought maybe it was a town. I tried to cross the creek to get there, but the ice broke beneath me. I fell through, got soaked. By the time I pulled myself out, I was so cold I could barely move. I tried to keep walking, but I just could not anymore. I laid down just for a moment, and then I do not remember anything else." Zachary felt anger rise in his chest, not at her but at the cruel circumstances that had put a young woman alone in the wilderness in winter. "You are lucky to be alive." "Am I?" She looked at him with those green eyes, and he saw such despair in them that it hurt. "I have nothing. No horse, no supplies, no money. Even if I make it to Walla Walla, what then? Who will hire a woman who shows up with nothing but the clothes on her back? Assuming I even have clothes anymore. Your clothes are drying by the fire. They will be wearable by morning, though I had to cut away your cloak. It was frozen to the creek bed, holding you down. Holding me down, she repeated softly. That is all life has done since my father died. Hold me down. Zachary moved closer, sitting on the edge of the cot. Without thinking, he reached out and took her hand. It was small in his, still cold but warming. Listen to me. You survived that creek. You survived 3 days alone in this wilderness. You are stronger than you know. Yes, things are hard right now, but hard does not mean impossible. You were made to rise. She stared at him, and something shifted in her expression. The despair did not vanish, but it receded, pushed back by the faintest glimmer of hope. You do not even know me. I know you are a fighter. That is enough. They stayed like that for a moment, hands linked, the fire crackling between them. Then Josephine pulled her hand away, suddenly aware that she was in a strange man's bedroll in a lined shack in the middle of nowhere. Her cheeks flushed. I should thank you, she said. You saved my life if you had not found me. But I did find you, no sense dwelling on what might have been. Still, thank you, Mr. Nash, Zachary, and you are welcome, Miss Sinclair, Josephine Sinclair. Well, Miss Sinclair, you should rest. Tomorrow we will figure out what comes next. But sleep did not come easily for either of them. Zachary made himself as comfortable as he could on the floor near the fire, giving Josephine the cot. He stared up at the rough beams of the ceiling and thought about the woman a few feet away. There was something about her, something beyond the circumstance of their meeting, that had gotten under his skin. Her courage, perhaps, or the way she had looked at him when he told her she was made to rise, as though he had given her something precious. Josephine lay in the cot, wrapped in the warmth of blankets and bedroll, and tried to process everything that had happened. She had been so certain she was going to die on that frozen creek. She had felt the cold seeping into her bones, had felt her thoughts growing slow and confused, and she had known with absolute clarity that this was the end. And then, impossibly, she had woken up here, saved by a stranger with kind eyes and gentle hands, Zachary Nash. She turned the name over in her mind. He was handsome in a rugged way, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his shirt. He looked to be in his late 20s, old enough to have seen some of the world but young enough to still have hope in his eyes. When he had taken her hand and told her she was made to rise, she had felt something shift inside her, some frozen part of her heart beginning to thaw. Morning came too quickly. Josephine woke to find Zachary already up, stoking the fire and heating coffee in a battered tin pot. Her clothes were draped over a chair near the hearth, dry but wrinkled. She sat up, clutching the blankets around her. Morning, Zachary said, not looking at her. Coffee will be ready in a minute. There is not much to eat, just some jerky and hardtack, but you should have something. Thank you. She waited until he stepped outside, claiming he needed to check on his horse before she quickly dressed. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons, still clumsy from the cold, but she managed. When he came back inside, she was sitting on the edge of the cot, trying to comb through her tangled hair with her fingers. He handed her a cup of coffee, and she took it gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warmth. They ate in silence, the jerky tough and salty, the hardtack like eating sweetened wood, but Josephine was grateful for every bite. It was the first food she had eaten in 2 days. So, Zachary said finally, we need to figure out your situation. My situation is hopeless, Josephine said flatly. I have no money, no supplies, no horse. Even if I could make it to Walla Walla, I have no guarantee of work, and I cannot impose on your kindness any further. You have already done more than anyone could expect. You are not imposing, and your situation is only hopeless if you give up." He set down his coffee cup and looked at her directly. "Here is what I propose. We ride double back to the Double R Ranch. It is about 2 days from here, maybe a bit less if the weather holds. The ranch is always looking for help, especially as we head into spring. They need someone to help with cooking, cleaning, mending. The work is hard, but it is honest and it pays. The boss is a fair man, I can vouch for you." Josephine stared at him. "You would do that? Vouch for a stranger? You are not a stranger anymore. You are someone who needed help, and I happen to be in a position to give it. Besides, I am a good judge of character. I think you will work hard and earn your keep." She felt tears prick her eyes. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Zachary was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "My sister died 5 years ago. She was traveling west with her husband and they were caught in a snowstorm. Her husband made it to help, but by the time anyone could get back to her, it was too late. She froze to death alone. I have always wondered if things might have been different if someone had found her in time, if someone had been there to help. Maybe this is my chance to make that right in some small way." Josephine reached out and touched his hand, a brief gesture of comfort and understanding. "I am so sorry." "So am I, but maybe some good can come from it now. What do you say? Will you come to the Double R?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will." They left the line shack an hour later after Zachary had cleaned up and made sure the fire was properly extinguished. Josephine rode behind him on his horse, her arms around his waist, her cheek pressed against his back. It was an intimate position, and she was acutely aware of every shift of his body, every breath he took. But it was also practical. They had no other choice. The ride was long and cold, but the day was clear, and the sun shone bright on the snow. Zachary talked as they rode, pointing out landmarks, telling her stories about the ranch and the men who worked there. He was trying to distract her, she realized, trying to keep her mind off the cold and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. She was grateful for it. That night, they made camp in a small grove of trees. Zachary built a fire and shared his rations, and they sat close to the flames, shoulders nearly touching. The sky above them was a riot of stars, more than Josephine had ever seen, and she stared up in wonder. "It is beautiful, is it not?" Zachary said softly. "I have never seen so many stars. Out here, away from towns and cities, you can see the whole universe spread out above you. Makes a person feel small, but in a good way. Reminds you that there is more to the world than just your own troubles." Josephine turned to look at him, his face half lit by the firelight. "You are a philosopher, Mr. Nash. Just a man who has spent too many nights alone with his thoughts." He smiled at her, and she felt her heart do something strange in her chest, a little flutter she had never felt before. They fell into silence again, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who are beginning to know each other. Eventually, Zachary spread out his bedroll and insisted Josephine take it while he slept closer to the fire. She protested, but he would not hear it. "You are still recovering," he said firmly. "You need proper rest." She did not have the energy to argue. As she lay wrapped in the bedroll, she watched him settle down near the fire, his back to her, his rifle within easy reach. He was protecting her, she realized, making sure nothing could get to her without going through him first. The thought made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since her father died. The next day dawned cold but clear. They rode hard, stopping only briefly to rest the horse and eat. Josephine could feel Zachary's urgency to get her somewhere safe, somewhere with shelter and food and warmth. She was grateful, but she was also beginning to dread the moment when they would arrive at the ranch. Once they did, this strange, intense time with him would be over. She would be just another worker and he would go back to his life. The thought left her feeling hollow, Late in the afternoon, they crested a hill and Zachary reined in his horse. "There," he said, pointing down into the valley below, "the Double R Ranch." Josephine looked where he indicated and saw a sprawling collection of buildings nestled in the valley. There was a large main house, several barns, and numerous smaller structures. Even from this distance, she could see people moving about, horses in corrals, smoke rising from chimneys. It looked prosperous and well-maintained, nothing like the rough, desperate places she had feared. They rode down into the valley, and as they approached the main house, a man stepped out onto the porch. He was older, in his 50s perhaps, with gray hair and a weathered face. He watched them approach with curiosity. "Zachary," the man called as they drew near, "you have been gone longer than expected. Thought maybe that stallion got the better of you." Zachary dismounted and then helped Josephine down. She stood close to him, suddenly nervous. "The stallion got away, Mr. Reynolds, but I found something more important." He gestured to Josephine. "This is Miss Josephine Sinclair. I found her 3 days ago, near frozen to death on a creek bed. She was traveling to Walla Walla looking for work. I told her you might have something for her here." Reynolds looked Josephine up and down, his expression unreadable. She forced herself to stand straight to meet his gaze directly. She would not cower, would not beg. If he did not want her here, she would find another way. "Can you cook?" Reynolds asked finally. "Yes, sir. My father and I lived alone for 10 years. I did all the cooking, cleaning, and mending. Can you handle hard work? Long days?" "I can, sir. I am not afraid of hard work." Reynolds was silent for a moment longer, and then he nodded. "All right. We can use the help. Our current cook is getting on in years and has been asking for an assistant. You will help her with meals, and you will also help the housekeeper with cleaning and laundry. Room and board plus $15 a month. If it works out, we can discuss more permanent arrangements after a trial period. Does that sound fair? $15 a month. It was more than Josephine had dared hope for. "Yes, sir. That sounds more than fair. Thank you." "Thank Zachary. He is the one who brought you here. Now, let me show you to your quarters. You can start work tomorrow after you have had a chance to rest and settle in." Josephine followed Reynolds toward a smaller building behind the main house, but she looked back over her shoulder at Zachary. He was standing where she had left him, watching her go. Their eyes met, and she saw something in his gaze that made her breath catch. Then Reynolds was leading her inside, and the moment was broken. Her room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk for her belongings. Not that she had any belongings. Everything she owned had been lost when her horse ran away. But it was hers, a space of her own, and after so many nights sleeping rough, it felt like a palace. Josephine sat on the edge of the bed and let out a long breath. She had made it. Against all odds, she had survived and found a place where she could start over. And it was all because of Zachary Nash, the cowboy who had lifted her up when the frozen ground had held her down. Over the following weeks, Josephine settled into life at the Double R Ranch. She worked alongside Martha, the elderly cook, learning the rhythms of feeding a household and a bunkhouse full of ranch hands. The work was hard, the days long, but she threw herself into it with determination. She would prove herself worthy of the chance she had been given. Martha was kind but exacting, teaching Josephine how to make biscuits light as air, how to stretch a stew to feed 30 men, how to keep a kitchen running smoothly even when everything seemed to be going wrong at once. Josephine absorbed it all like a sponge, grateful for the knowledge and the sense of purpose it gave her. But it was not just the work that kept her going. It was the moments when she would catch glimpses of Zachary around the ranch. He was often out with the other cowboys, mending fences or checking on the cattle, but sometimes he would stop by the main house for a meal or a cup of coffee. When their eyes met across the kitchen or the dining room, Josephine felt that same flutter in her chest, that same strange pull toward him. She told herself it was just gratitude. He had saved her life, after all. Of course she felt drawn to him. But as the weeks passed, she began to realize it was more than that. She found herself thinking about him at odd moments, wondering where he was, what he was doing. She looked forward to the times when he would come in from the cold, his cheeks red and his eyes bright, and she could pour him coffee and hear about his day. Zachary, for his part, was equally aware of Josephine. He found excuses to come to the main house more often than necessary, just to see her. He loved the way she moved through the kitchen, efficient and graceful, the way she hummed softly to herself when she thought no one was listening. He loved her smile, rare but radiant when it appeared, and the way she had slowly begun to come back to life after her ordeal. But he held himself back. She was vulnerable, still recovering from everything that had happened to her. The last thing she needed was a cowboy making unwanted advances. So he kept his feelings to himself, and contented himself with the small interactions they had, the brief conversations, the shared looks that seemed to say more than words ever could. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and turning the world green. With the change of seasons came more work. The cattle needed to be moved to higher pastures, foals were being born, and the ranch was a flurry of activity from dawn to dusk. Josephine threw herself into the work, helping Martha prepare enormous meals for the hungry cowboys and keeping the house running smoothly. One evening in late April, Zachary came to the kitchen long after the dinner hour. Most of the ranch hands had already eaten and gone to the bunkhouse, and Josephine was cleaning up, her sleeves rolled up to her elbows, her hair escaping from its pins. She looked up when she heard his footsteps and smiled. "You missed dinner," she said, "but I saved you a plate." "You did not have to do that, I know, but I did anyway." She pulled a covered plate from the warming oven and set it on the table. "Sit, eat." Zachary did as he was told, suddenly ravenous. The food was good, hearty beef stew and fresh bread, and he ate quickly. Josephine poured him coffee and then went back to her washing up. They were quiet for a few minutes, comfortable in each other's presence. "How are you settling in?" Zachary asked finally. "Well, better than well, actually. I like the work and Martha has been wonderful to work with. Mr. Reynolds told me yesterday that he is going to offer me a permanent position after my trial period ends. I will have steady work, a place to live, money to save. It is more than I ever hoped for. I am glad. You deserve it." Josephine turned from the wash basin, drying her hands on her apron. "I owe it all to you. If you had not found me that day, I would be dead. And even after you saved my life, you brought me here, vouched for me. You gave me a future." Zachary stood, suddenly needing to move, to do something with the energy coursing through him. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Josephine said firmly. "You did what a good man would do. There is a difference." They stood looking at each other across the kitchen, the air between them charged with unspoken things. Zachary wanted to close the distance, to take her in his arms and tell her everything he had been feeling, but he held back. It was too soon. She needed more time. But Josephine had her own ideas. She had spent weeks thinking about Zachary, about the way he had saved her, the way he looked at her, the way she felt when he was near. She had tried to tell herself it was just gratitude, but she knew better now. She was falling in love with him, had probably been falling since the moment she opened her eyes in that lined shack and saw him looking down at her with such concern. "Zachary," she said softly, "do you ever think about that day, the day you found me?" "Every day," he admitted. "I think about how close you came to dying, about how if I had taken a different path or been an hour later, I never would have found you. It terrifies me." "I think about it too, But not the dying part. I think about waking up and seeing you there. I think about you telling me I was made to rise. No one has ever believed in me like that before. Josephine, he began, but she held up a hand. Let me finish, please. She took a breath, gathering her courage. I know I am supposed to be grateful to you. I am grateful, but it is more than that now. I care about you, Zachary. I find myself looking for you during the day, hoping you will come by so I can see you. I think about you at night before I fall asleep. I do not know if this is just because you saved me or if it is something real, but I needed to tell you. I needed you to know. Zachary felt his heart swell in his chest. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides and took her hands in his. It is real, he said, his voice rough with emotion. God help me, it is real. I have been trying to keep my distance, trying not to take advantage of your gratitude, but Josephine, I am in love with you. I think I have been since the moment I saw you lying on that frozen creek and felt how badly I needed you to survive. Tears filled her eyes. You love me. I do. I love your strength, your courage, your determination to keep going even when everything seemed hopeless. I love the way you hum when you are working and the way you smile like it costs you something but you give it anyway. I love you, Josephine Sinclair, and if you will let me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you. She laughed, a sound of pure joy, and then she was in his arms and he was holding her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her against him. It felt like coming home. I love you too, she whispered against his chest. I was so afraid you only saw me as someone you had to help, someone to pity. Never, he said fiercely. I have never pitied you. I admire you. You are the strongest person I have ever met. They stood like that for a long time, just holding each other, marveling at the fact that they had found each other, against all the odds. Finally, Zachary pulled back just enough to look down at her face. Her green eyes were bright with tears and happiness, and he thought she had never looked more beautiful. May I kiss you? He asked softly. In answer, Josephine rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as though they were both afraid of breaking the spell. But then it deepened, became something more, a promise and a claiming all at once. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Marry me, Zachary said, the words spilling out before he could think better of them. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few months, but Josephine, life is short and uncertain. We both know that better than most. I do not want to waste time. I want to build a life with you. Marry me. Josephine stared at him, her heart racing. It was fast, recklessly so, but he was right. Life was short and uncertain, and she had nearly lost hers. She did not want to waste a single moment of whatever time she had been given. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you. The smile that broke across Zachary's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He lifted her off her feet and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. They were married 3 weeks later in Walla Walla, Washington Territory, in a small church with Martha and Mr. Reynolds and a handful of other ranch hands as witnesses. Josephine wore a simple blue dress that Martha had helped her make, and Zachary wore his best shirt and a new vest. The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary kissed his bride with such enthusiasm that the small congregation broke into laughter and applause. Mr. Reynolds had given them a week off for a honeymoon, and they spent it in a small hotel in Walla Walla, exploring the growing town and simply enjoying being together. They talked for hours, learning everything there was to know about each other, and in the quiet moments, they marveled at how their lives had intersected, how a terrible ordeal had led to such unexpected joy. You ever regret it? Josephine asked one night as they lay in bed, her head on his chest, his arm around her shoulders. "Riding out after that stallion. If you had stayed at the ranch, you never would have found me and your life could have gone on exactly as it was." "Not for a single second," Zachary said. "Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." She tilted her head up to kiss him. "You saved my life that day, but you have given me so much more than just life. You have given me hope, purpose, love. You have given me a future I never thought I could have." "We saved each other," he said softly. "I was just going through the motions before I met you, working, eating, sleeping, but not really living. You changed that. You made me want more." They returned to the Double R Ranch the following week, moving into a small cabin that Mr. Reynolds had set aside for married ranch hands. It was cozy, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it was theirs. Josephine spent her days working in the main house, and Zachary spent his working the ranch, but their evenings were their own. They would sit together by the fire, Josephine mending while Zachary read aloud from whatever book they could get their hands on, and they would talk and laugh and plan for the future. As spring turned to summer, they fell into a rhythm. The work was hard, but they were young and strong and happy. Josephine proved herself invaluable to the ranch, not just in the kitchen but in 100 small ways. She had a knack for organization and efficiency, and soon Mr. Reynolds was consulting her on household matters, trusting her judgment. Zachary continued to work with the cattle and horses, and his skill and dedication earned him the respect of the other ranch hands and a promotion to foreman. In the evenings, they would walk together along the creek that ran through the ranch property, hand in hand, talking about their days. It was on one of these walks in late June that Josephine told Zachary she was pregnant. He stopped in his tracks, staring at her. "Are you certain?" She nodded, smiling through nervous tears. "Martha helped me confirm it. We are going to have a baby, Zachary. In February, if Martha's calculations are correct." He let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around just as he had the night she agreed to marry him. "We are going to be parents," he said wonderingly. "Josephine, we are going to have a family." She laughed, holding on to him. "I know. I can hardly believe it myself." They told Mr. Reynolds and Martha that evening, and both were thrilled. Martha immediately began fussing over Josephine, insisting she not work too hard, and Mr. Reynolds congratulated Zachary with a hearty handshake. "You are a good man, Zachary," Reynolds said, "and you have found yourself a good woman. I am happy for you both." The summer passed in a blur of work and preparation. Josephine continued to work in the kitchen, though Martha and Zachary both hovered over her, making sure she did not overdo it. Zachary worked on fixing up their cabin, adding shelves and a cradle he built with his own hands. They were building a life, a home, a future, and every day felt like a gift. In the fall, as the leaves turned gold and red and the air grew crisp, Josephine and Zachary took a day to ride out to the place where he had found her. The creek was not frozen now, but flowing clear and cold, and the place where she had lain that January morning was covered in soft grass. They stood there together, silent, remembering. Josephine reached for Zachary's hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I almost died here," she said softly, "but you did not. You survived, and look at us now." She turned to face him, placing his hand on her belly where their child grew. "Look at us now," she echoed. He bent to kiss her, gentle and sweet. "You were made to rise, Josephine, and you did. You rose from that frozen ground, and you have not stopped rising since." "We rose together," she corrected. "You lifted me up, but I like to think I have lifted you up too." "You have, more than you know." They rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Life was not perfect. There were still hard days, still struggles and setbacks, but they faced them together, and that made all the difference. Winter came early that year, blanketing the ranch in snow by November. Josephine's pregnancy progressed well, though she grew tired more easily and had to cut back on her kitchen duties. Martha took on more of the work, and Zachary made sure Josephine rested as much as possible. He was terrified something would go wrong, that he would lose her and the baby, and his fear made him overprotective. "I am not made of glass," Josephine told him one evening in December as he fussed over her, adjusting her pillows and making sure she had enough blankets. "I am pregnant, not dying." "I know," he said, sitting beside her on the bed. "But I cannot help it. I cannot lose you, Josephine. I just cannot." She took his face in her hands. "You are not going to lose me. I am strong, remember? You told me so yourself." "I know you are, but humor me, all right. Let me take care of you." She smiled. "All right, but only because I love you." "I love you too, more than anything." The baby came on a cold February night in 1879, exactly 1 year and 1 month after Zachary had found Josephine on the frozen creek. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Zachary, pacing outside the cabin while Martha and the doctor worked inside, thought he might go mad with fear. But finally, as dawn was breaking over the mountains, he heard it. A baby's cry, strong and lusty. Martha opened the door, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son," she said, "a healthy baby boy, and Josephine is fine. Exhausted, but fine." Zachary nearly collapsed with relief. He rushed inside and found Josephine propped up in bed, pale and sweaty but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up when he entered, and her smile widened. "Come meet your son," she said softly. He approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the baby in her arms. He was tiny, red-faced, with a shock of dark hair. His eyes were closed, and his little fists were curled against his chest. Zachary felt his heart expand so much he thought it might burst. "He is perfect," he whispered. "He is," Josephine agreed. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but none had felt quite right. Now, looking at his son, Zachary knew. "Thomas," he said, "after your father." Tears filled Josephine's eyes. "Thomas," she repeated. "Thomas Nash, I love it." Zachary sat on the edge of the bed and put his arm around his wife, the two of them gazing down at their son. "This is our family," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is everything." The years that followed were full and rich. Thomas grew into a lively, curious boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. 2 years after Thomas was born, they had a daughter they named Sarah, and 2 years after that, another son they called James. The cabin, which had once seemed spacious, became cramped, and Zachary built an addition, then another, until it was a proper house. Josephine continued to work for the ranch, though her role evolved over time. She became the ranch's unofficial bookkeeper and manager, working closely with Mr. Reynolds to keep everything running smoothly. Zachary thrived as foreman, earning the respect and loyalty of every man who worked under him. They were prospering, building something lasting. But it was not just about work and prosperity. It was about the life they had built together, the family they had created. It was about the evenings spent around the dinner table, Thomas chattering about his day while Sarah played with her food and baby James banged his spoon. It was about the nights when Zachary and Josephine would finally fall into bed, exhausted but happy, and hold each other in the darkness. "You remember that day?" Josephine asked one night years later. Thomas was 7 now, Sarah 5, and James 3. They had just put the children to bed and were sitting together on the porch, watching the stars come out. "The day you found me, I think about it all the time," Zachary admitted. I wonder what would have happened if I had taken a different trail that day, if I had decided to turn back earlier. We would never have met, but you did not. You took exactly the right trail at exactly the right time, and you saved me. He turned to look at her. She was no longer the desperate, half-frozen girl he had found on that creek bed. She was a woman in her prime, strong and confident, a mother and a wife and so much more. But when he looked at her, he still saw that girl, still felt that same desperate need to keep her safe, to lift her up. "You saved me too," he said. "I was half alive before I met you. Just going through the motions. You gave me a reason to really live." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "We saved each other." They sat like that for a long time, listening to the night sounds, feeling the cool breeze on their faces. Inside, their children slept, safe and loved. Around them, the ranch hummed with life. And above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, bearing silent witness to this small, perfect moment. As the years continued to pass, their children grew. Thomas showed an aptitude for working with horses, just like his father, and spent every spare moment in the stables or the corrals. Sarah was clever and studious, always asking questions, always wanting to know how things worked. James was the wild one, fearless and adventurous, giving his parents gray hairs with his antics. Josephine and Zachary grew older too, though they aged well, their love keeping them young in the ways that mattered. Their hair grayed, their faces lined, but when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people they had been, still felt that same rush of love and gratitude. Mr. Reynolds passed away in 1890, and in his will, he left the Double R Ranch to Zachary and Josephine. It was an incredible gift, a recognition of all they had done for the ranch over the years. They renamed it the Nash Ranch and continued to run it with the same dedication and integrity that Reynolds had shown. Their children grew into young adults. Thomas married a local girl and took over the day-to-day running of the ranch. Sarah went to school in Seattle and became a teacher, though she returned often to visit. James, true to his nature, became a scout for the Army, exploring the territories and sending long, entertaining letters home. Josephine and Zachary stepped back from the hard physical labor, but remained active in the ranch's management. They also spent more time together, taking long rides through the mountains, revisiting the places that had meaning to them. They returned often to the creek where Zachary had found Josephine, standing together on the bank, remembering. "You have any regrets?" Josephine asked him on one of these visits. They were in their 50s now, their children grown, their life's work largely done. It was a time for reflection. Zachary considered the question seriously. "No," he said finally. "I do not think I do. There are things I might have done differently, choices I might have made better, but regrets? No. Everything I have done has led me here to this moment with you. How could I regret any of it?" "I feel the same way," Josephine said. "Even the hard parts, even nearly dying on that frozen creek, it was all worth it because it brought me to you." He pulled her close, and they stood together as the sun set over the mountains, painting the world in gold and fire. They had built a good life together, a life filled with love and purpose and meaning. They had risen from the frozen ground together, and they had not stopped rising since. Years later, when they were both old and gray, they would sit on the porch of their home and watch their grandchildren play in the yard. Thomas had given them 3 grandchildren, and there was talk of more on the way. Sarah visited when she could, bringing stories of her students and the books she was reading. James, now retired from the Army, had settled nearby with a wife and 2 children of his own. Josephine and Zachary would hold hands and watch it all, marveling at the life they had created, at the legacy they were leaving behind. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, Josephine would turn to her husband and say, "You told me I was made to rise." And Zachary would smile and reply, "You were. And you did. We both did." On a spring morning in 1905, Josephine woke to find Zachary already up and dressed, standing at the window and looking out at the ranch. She joined him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Everything," he said. "How lucky I am. How grateful. I found you on the worst day of your life, and somehow it became the best day of mine." "It became the best day of mine, too," she said. "The day my life really began." He turned to her, cupping her face in his hands. They were old hands now, weathered and scarred from decades of hard work, but they were still gentle. "I love you, Josephine Nash. I have loved you from the moment I saw you lying on that frozen creek, and I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you," she said, tears in her eyes. "My cowboy, my hero. The man who lifted me up when the frozen ground held me down." He kissed her then, sweet and gentle, a kiss that held a lifetime of love and devotion. And when they broke apart, they stood together at the window, looking out at the ranch they had built, the life they had created, the family that bore witness to their love. The frozen ground had tried to hold her down all those years ago, but Zachary had lifted her up. And together, they had risen. They had built a life of meaning and purpose, filled with love and laughter and the kind of joy that comes from facing hardship and surviving it together. They had proven that even in the harshest wilderness, even on the coldest day, love could bloom and thrive and last. Their story was one of survival and redemption, of second chances and the power of human connection. It was a story that would be passed down through generations, told around dinner tables and firelight, a reminder that sometimes, in our darkest moments, salvation comes in the form of a stranger who chooses to stop, to help, to care. Zachary and Josephine lived out their days on the Nash Ranch, surrounded by the family they had created and the land they loved. They died within months of each other, both well into their 80s, their hands clasped together until the end. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple headstones that bore their names and a single inscription. They rose together. And on winter mornings, when the frost coated the grass and the creek ran cold and clear, their grandchildren and great-grandchildren would walk past those graves and remember the story of how the frozen ground had held her down, and how the cowboy lifted her up and told her she was made to rise. And they would remember that she did rise, and so did he. And together they created something beautiful and lasting that would endure long after they were gone. Their legacy was not just the ranch or the family name. It was the love they had shown each other, the kindness they had extended to others, the example they had set of what it meant to be truly devoted to another person. It was the proof that even in the harsh, unforgiving landscape of the Wild West, gentleness and compassion could not only survive but flourish. The Nash Ranch continued to thrive for generations, run by Thomas and his children, then by his grandchildren. Each generation heard the story of Zachary and Josephine, of the miraculous meeting that had started it all, and each generation took something different from it. Some saw it as a love story, others as a survival tale, still others as proof that fate and timing could change everything. But perhaps the most important lesson was this, that in our darkest moments, when we feel held down by circumstances beyond our control, there is always the possibility of rising. Sometimes we rise on our own, through sheer determination and will. And sometimes, if we are very lucky, someone comes along to lift us up, to remind us of our own strength, to give us the push we need to find our footing again. Zachary had given Josephine that push. He had found her when she was at her lowest, had refused to let her give up, had seen in her the strength she could not see in herself. And in doing so, he had not only saved her life but had found his own purpose, his own reason for living. They had completed each other in a way that went beyond romance, though their love was deep and true. They had been partners in the truest sense, facing life's challenges together, celebrating its joys together, building something together that was greater than the sum of its parts. The story of Zachary and Josephine Nash became a legend in that part of Montana, told and retold until it took on the quality of myth. Some details were embellished, others forgotten, but the core remained the same. The cowboy and the woman on the frozen creek, the rescue and the love that followed, the life they built together against all odds. And every winter, when the creeks froze over and the snow fell thick on the ground, people would remember. They would remember that survival is possible, that love can bloom even in the coldest seasons, and that sometimes the worst day of your life can lead to the best thing that ever happens to you. The Nash Ranch still stands today, a working ranch run by the descendants of Zachary and Josephine. The house they built has been expanded and modernized, but the original structure remains, carefully preserved. Visitors can tour the property and hear the story of its founders, can walk the land they walked and see the creek where it all began. And sometimes, on quiet winter mornings, when the mist rises off the water and the world is hushed and still, people swear they can feel something in that place. A presence, perhaps, or just an echo of the powerful love that once existed there. They stand on the bank of the creek, looking at the place where a woman once lay dying, and they think about how one man's choice to stop, to help, to care, changed not just two lives but the lives of everyone who came after. That is the power of compassion. That is the power of love. And that is the legacy of Zachary and Josephine Nash, the cowboy who lifted her up when the frozen ground held her down, and the woman who was made to rise.